Putin thought he was getting a loyal army. Instead, he got a deadly mutiny. Russia's so-called alliance with North Korea has taken a shocking turn. After sending up to 12,000 North Korean troops to help in Russia's Kursk counteroffensive, Putin expected unwavering support. Instead, some of the troops have turned their guns on the very Russian soldiers they were sent to fight alongside. On January 22nd, news broke that 3 North Korean soldiers had killed their Russian comrades and vanished. Now, a massive manhunt is underway. But why would North Korean troops, handpicked by Kim Jong-un, suddenly start killing Russian forces? Were they desperate, betrayed, or is there something bigger going on in this so-called alliance? In this video, we're breaking down what really happened, what it means for Putin and Kim, and whether this is just the beginning of a much bigger problem. Let's start with the manhunt. On January 22nd, Radio Free Asia, or RFA, was among the first to report that 3 North Korean soldiers are wanted for killing 5 of their Russian comrades on the Kursk battlefield. The report was accompanied by a picture of a wanted notice that contained a trio of facial composite drawings of the North Koreans in question. That notice was shared by the Telegram channel Dossier Spiona, along with an explanation that the trio is currently being hunted and is classified as armed and dangerous by the Russian military. The poster itself explains the North Koreans' supposed crime. "Koreans killed servicemen of the Russian armed forces," blares its headline. On January 13, 2025, in the area of the village of Bolshoye Soldatskoye, Kursk region, 3 DPRK or Democratic People's Republic of Korean soldiers killed 5 servicemen of the 810th Separate Marine Brigade, Military Unit 13140 from Sevastopol. That's interesting information. The 810th Separate Marine Brigade was formed in 1967 and has been a nearly ever-present force in the Ukraine war. When Ukraine invaded Kursk, the brigade was one of the first that Putin sent to counter the threat, leading to it being badly battered as it came up against more prepared Ukrainian forces. Forbes reported in December 2024 that the 2,500-soldier brigade was finally being rotated out of service once Putin launched his full Kursk counteroffensive. It was high time that happened. The brigade, along with Russia's 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, had spent months conducting failed and undermanned assaults against Ukraine's soldiers in Kursk. The 155th had even been destroyed and rebuilt several times, claims the outlet, with the 810th likely being in no better condition. It's likely that the brigade lost both of its 400-person battalions back in November when it attacked a Ukrainian garrison in Pogrebki, for instance. Why does this matter? Well, the 810th Separate Marine Brigade wasn't involved in active operations in Kursk at the time 5 of its members were killed by North Korean soldiers. They were meant to be resting. This means the North Koreans stationed with them also wouldn't have been on the front lines. Their killings weren't out of immediate desperation so they could try to escape the fighting. Rather, they may have been premeditated and engineered to give the 3 North Korean soldiers a chance to get away before the 810th was redeployed in Kursk. Coming back to the wanted poster, RFA claims that it says the North Korean soldiers are armed and dangerous. If found, the poster reads, observe personal safety measures and report to the Kursk Regional Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. It sounds like the poster is telling any rank-and-file Russian soldiers not to engage with the North Korean troops, a wise precaution, seeing as those soldiers apparently managed to kill 5 of Russia's finest Marines. The poster also claims that the North Koreans may be moving as a group in the territories of the Kursk, Belgorod, Bryansk, and Oryol regions. That tells us that Russia has been slow off the mark when it comes to tracking these rebellious soldiers down, especially if they've managed to make it out of Kursk entirely while being on foot. Now, there are caveats to this report. RFA quotes Spy Dossier as claiming that the report and wanted poster come from a reliable source. However, RFA hasn't been able to independently verify that the poster is real. That raises the possibility of it being a forgery, perhaps a deception created by Ukraine in its never-ending propaganda war with Putin, and that the North Korean soldiers aren't actually wanted. But what if they are? What would have even caused them to kill their Russian comrades in the first place? The UK's Metro newspaper notes that no motive for the killing has been established. Russian authorities are apparently trying to cover up the whole ordeal, informing only the soldiers in Kursk who may be affected and not breathing a word of the massacre to the Russian people. That makes sense. Putin has been cagey about the arrival of North Korean soldiers in his country since October 2024, with neither he nor North Korean President Kim Jong-un acknowledging their presence. Russia is playing games with these soldiers, letting the rest of the world draw its own conclusions without confirming anything one way or the other. So it stands to reason that Russia would like to keep this manhunt for 3 North Korean soldiers under wraps, because confirming that it's happening would equate to stating that there are North Korean soldiers fighting alongside Russians in Kursk. So we have no word about motives. However, RFA is willing to speculate. It says that there's a possibility that all of this is one massive misunderstanding. The North Koreans didn't massacre their Russian Marine comrades purposefully. RFA says that some military bloggers are already speculating that the deaths of the 5 Russians may have been due to a friendly fire incident caused by the language barrier that exists between the Russian soldiers and their North Korean counterparts. The language barrier has been highlighted as a potentially major problem ever since North Korean forces arrived in Kursk. In November 2024, NBC reported that the United States believes that this barrier, combined with the North Korean soldiers' collective inexperience, would make any sort of cohesion between the two groups difficult to form. The average Russian soldier is going to say, "What are they doing here?" said former US National Intelligence Officer for North Korea Sidney Seiler. "I'm having to hold their hand, I'm tripping over their bodies," is the attitude Seiler believes the Russians have taken to their North Korean comrades. That attitude would start any relationship off on a bad foot. If the Russian soldiers didn't want the North Koreans there in the first place, they're certainly not going to make much effort to overcome the language barrier issues that exist between them. That combination of Russian skepticism and language barriers exacerbates the fact that the North Korean soldiers have entered a completely new environment in Kursk. Even the best of them have still spent their entire lives in an isolated country, completely cut off from the rest of the world, while having gained no real battle experience. Throwing them into Kursk and the front lines of raging fighting between Ukraine and Russia could show Russia that these soldiers aren't viable. That's the opinion of South Korean Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun, who believes that this inexperience had led to Russia treating the North Korean soldiers as though they're expendable. Kim Jong-un is selling North Korean soldiers as cannon fodder mercenaries, Kim claimed in October 2024. There certainly seems to be little effort to integrate the two sets of soldiers. Petro Hadayshuk, who's a sergeant major in Ukraine's 80th Independent Air Assault Brigade, claims that captured Russians in Kursk have revealed that they generally have no contact at all with their North Korean comrades. Firstly, due to the language barrier, says Hadayshuk, lending credence to RFA's suggestion that language issues may have been to blame for the North Korean massacre. Secondly, the North Koreans live, eat, and conduct their activities completely separately from the Russian occupiers. They have no joint operations except for combat. The North Koreans' task, according to the captured occupiers, was exclusively assault operations, while the Russians were meant to secure the positions in case of success, added the Ukrainian senior sergeant. Those comments potentially throw a whole new light on what happened with the 3 North Korean soldiers. Perhaps they weren't stationed with the 810th Separate Marine Brigade at all. Instead, they were operating on their own. Language barriers had prevented them from receiving proper orders, so they were on the lookout for anybody who seemed vaguely Ukrainian. The 5 Marines who died at their hands may have been mistaken by the North Koreans for Ukrainian soldiers. Only after sifting through identification papers would they have realized their collective mistake, leading them to going on the run rather than facing up to the consequences of their actions. It's a possibility. After all, this wouldn't be the first time that North Korean troops have accidentally attacked their Russian comrades. On December 14, 2024, the Kyiv Independent reported that North Korean soldiers fighting in Kursk had accidentally opened fire on their Russian comrades. The news came via the HUR Telegram channel, which said that the North Koreans were actively involved in combat in the Kursk Oblast when they came across members of the Chechen Akhmat unit. That unit isn't part of the Russian military but is fighting alongside it as a paramilitary force. The North Koreans didn't know that. Language barriers may have again been a factor and opened fire. The result? An attack that killed 8 of the Russia-friendly soldiers. LBC offered more details. It claims that the unit of North Korean soldiers was already fearful when they came across a set of Russian vehicles being used by the Chechen Akhmat. That fear may have led them to firing before thinking, as it appears they mistook those vehicles for Ukrainian mechanized units advancing on their position. So the North Koreans at least proved they had some level of combat effectiveness in the encounter. Only they did so by killing soldiers who were likely approaching to join them in whatever assault against Ukraine they had planned next. Perhaps that same thing happened in January. 3 North Korean soldiers mistook Russian Marines for Ukrainian enemies and opened fire, killing 5 before realizing what they'd done. Terrified over what that mistake might mean for them, they ran instead of reporting the incident, sparking the Russian manhunt. That's one possible scenario. However, there is another way all of this might have happened. Language barriers and friendly fire may have had nothing to do with the massacre of the 5 soldiers from the 810th Separate Marine Brigade. It could simply have been a case of the North Korean soldiers having enough of their mistreatment at the hands of the Russians, leading them to take revenge in the only way they know how, killing them so they could escape. There are plenty of breadcrumbs that could lead us to that possible motive. RFA provides one in its report on the wanted poster by pointing out that North Korean soldiers in Kursk have been complaining about receiving insufficient rations. The Defense Post also reported on the issue in December 2024, noting that Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence had highlighted how many of the North Korean soldiers were now suffering from malnutrition due to not receiving enough food for their daily operations. Russia attempted a solution. It sent a deputy commander in its resource support division to figure out what to do, with that commander eventually deciding to restock the North Korean food supplies with rations taken from the food reserves of Russia's airborne assault brigades. RFA provides more details, claiming that the commander was Major General Mevlyutov, who serves in the Leningrad military district. He supposedly pulled reserve rations from the 11th Air Assault Brigade. These food problems seem to spread throughout the North Korean units stationed in Kursk. According to Mikhailo Makaruk, who serves with Ukraine's 8th Special Operations Regiment, most of the North Korean soldiers killed in Kursk barely have any equipment to speak of. He says they're typically provided with a couple of low-quality grenades and medical kits, but it's rare to find food among the supplies those soldiers have. Russia simply isn't feeding its North Korean soldiers enough. But there's a little twist to this malnutrition tale. Guess whose command the dissatisfied North Korean soldiers were under at the time of their complaints about rations? The 810th Separate Marine Brigade. The very brigade that has 5 murdered soldiers is the one under which the wanted North Koreans were serving. That raises many new possibilities. Perhaps the North Koreans were actually stationed with the 810th and they felt that it was their supposed comrades who were withholding food intended for them. Starvation may have led to desperation, with the North Koreans choosing to kill the Marines to get their hands on some food before they hightailed it into the Kursk wilderness. Russia's willingness to allow its North Korean soldiers to starve may have come back to bite it, with those North Korean soldiers choosing to murder to get their hands on food no matter what happens to them in the future. It's another possibility. And it's one that's backed by the fact Russia seems to be treating its North Korean soldiers as expendable. You may remember Kim Jong-un's claim that Russia is using its North Korean soldiers as cannon fodder to soak up Ukrainian ammunition before Russia's forces storm in. That's backed up by Petro Haidashuk's comments about the North Koreans typically being the first sent into assaults on Ukrainian positions, with Russian soldiers only following up if the North Koreans happen to succeed. It all adds up to Russia treating its North Korean comrades as though they are lesser. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that that sort of attitude is running rampant in the Russian military. The Korea Times reported on this issue in its January 17th recap of South Korean Ambassador Hwang Jung-kook's remarks at the United Nations Security Council meeting. Hwang said that Russia has taken a cynical approach to the North Korean soldiers it's received from Kim Jong-un, with most of them being treated as expendable. Hwang even has testimony to back that claim. The testimonies of 2 North soldiers recently captured by Ukraine's military in the Kursk region clearly demonstrates that the North Korean troops are engaged in combat and being dissipated as expendables, he told the council. And it gets worse. North Korean soldiers are apparently being used as human mine detectors, according to the South Korean ambassador. The North Korean soldiers used old-fashioned human wave tactics and were then chased and attacked by Ukrainian drones, he told the Security Council. According to the reports, they were even crossing landmine fields in a single column, 3 to 4 meters apart, like human mine detectors without cover or mine-clearing vehicles. There's also the possibility that the North Korean soldiers sent to Russia were tricked into fighting in Kursk. That also comes from 2 captives Hwang mentioned in his remarks. On January 11th, Radio Liberty reported on those captured North Koreans. One of them, supposedly born in 2005, told the Ukrainians that he thought he was going for training, not to fight a war against Ukraine. In other words, the North Koreans fighting on the front lines in Kursk were never meant to be there in the first place. They were supposed to be learning from Russia's soldiers, at least that's what they were told, but they're now starving, being used to soak up Ukrainian ammunition in human wave attacks, and blowing themselves up, looking for mines, because Russia won't provide them with any equipment they need. The reports keep on coming. On January 13th, the Chosun Daily also reported on the pair of captured North Korean soldiers. It revealed one of the soldiers confirmed the complete lack of food that Kim Jong-un's troops had to deal with. The wounded soldiers revealed that they often went 4 to 5 days without food or water. The same outlet notes that many North Korean soldiers chose death ahead of being captured, with some even going so far as to commit suicide when it becomes clear that Ukraine has won a battle against them. Those decisions are likely made out of fear of what might happen to their families back home, with those families also being forced to live in silence should their loved ones not make it back from Kursk. Reports suggest they're being coerced into signing pledges that they won't speak about the deaths of any soldiers, meaning those in Kursk are not only there under false pretense, if the captured North Korean soldiers are to be believed, but they won't even be remembered by their country if they die. And many of them will die. Hwang Jung-kook says that South Korea's casualty assessments suggest that at least 300 of North Korea's 12,000 soldiers have already died in Kursk, with a further 2,700 being injured. That's about a quarter of the total force, and you have to believe the North Koreans remaining in the oblast are paying attention. Bringing all of this back to the 3 North Koreans accused of murdering 5 Russian Marines, think about the situation in which they found themselves. Starving to the point where they complained about the lack of food available, those soldiers may not have known that they were being sent to Russia to fight. They thought they were stationed with the 810th Separate Marine Brigade to train and learn about the tactics Russia was using against Ukraine. Already racked by hunger, perhaps they had to watch as their supposed Russian comrades sent their fellow North Koreans to die. ill-fated human wave assaults cut those soldiers down in droves, while Russian forces stood back and waited to mop up. People those 3 murderous soldiers may have known might also have been among those used to clear up the minefields on foot with no equipment to help with the job. They'd been lied to, starved, used as cannon fodder by a Russian military that doesn't even want them there and has no interest in communicating with them. Those sound like a strong collection of motives for murder. Whatever the case, be it a friendly fire incident or premeditated murder, it's clear that not all is rosy in the alliance Russia has formed with North Korea. Our final question is simple. What will these North Korean soldiers killing their Russian comrades mean for the relationship Putin has formed with Kim? The sad answer is not a lot. Putin has shown throughout the Ukraine war that he's more than willing to feed his own people into the meat grinder to get what he wants. It's that approach that has led to over 835,000 Russians dying, getting injured or being captured on the battlefield in 3 years of fighting, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance. Losing 5 more won't mean much to Putin because those soldiers, even though they were Marines, were likely to die anyway. As for Kim, he treats the soldiers he sends to Kursk with the same callous disregard they face when they arrive in Russia. He's likely already lying to them about why they're being sent to Kursk in the first place, meaning he doesn't care whether they're prepared or not. The mistreatment that may have driven these 3 North Korean soldiers to murder also won't mean a lot to him. After all, he's getting money, access to Russian military technology, and an ally in his efforts to work around the United Nations sanctions against his country. Plus, any soldiers who happen to make it back from Kursk will come back with direct combat experience, which is something that's sorely lacking in the North Korean military. Russia will want to capture the murderers as much to show the other North Korean soldiers in Kursk what will happen when they step out of line as they will for enacting any sort of justice. Kim simply won't care. But what do you think about the North Korean soldiers turning against their Russian comrades? Was it a case of friendly fire, or were the North Koreans motivated to murder by rampant mistreatment? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out North Korean battalion wiped out in Kursk, or click this other video instead.